They took your story and handed it to 3 different experts, 3 different minds, 3 different perspectives. But when they reached the same sentence in your story, all 3 stopped and circled it. Not because they felt sorry for you, not because they thought you were weak. They circled it because that sentence revealed something they couldn't ignore. You survived what was supposed to define you. And if you're still standing after everything that tried to change you, maybe your story isn't evidence of your weakness. Maybe it's evidence of what you're becoming. Your past contains moments you may wish you could erase. Moments when you felt betrayed, rejected, ignored, misunderstood, or completely alone. Moments when you questioned your own value and wondered why life kept placing obstacles in your path. Maybe there was a sentence in your story that you never wanted anyone to read. A moment you buried so deeply that you convinced yourself it no longer mattered. But sometimes, the part of your story you are most ashamed of is the exact part that reveals how powerful you have become. Those 3 experts didn't circle that sentence because they felt sorry for you. They circled it because they recognized something hidden inside it. They saw a turning point. They saw evidence that you were forced to become stronger before you even realized you were changing. Think about what happened after the hardest moments of your life. You didn't remain the same person. You became more observant. You became more careful about who you trusted. You learned that not everyone who smiles at you is genuinely happy for you. You learned that some people only support you when your success doesn't threaten their comfort. You learned that silence can sometimes reveal more than words ever could. And perhaps you thought those lessons were making you cold. They weren't. They were making you aware. There is a difference between becoming bitter and becoming wise. Bitterness says, I will never trust anyone again. Wisdom says, I will trust, but I will pay attention. Bitterness says, nobody deserves access to me. Wisdom says, access to me must be earned. Bitterness wants revenge. Wisdom chooses growth. That sentence they circled may represent the exact moment you stopped begging people to understand you. The moment you realized that constantly explaining yourself was exhausting. The moment you decided that your actions would speak louder than your explanations. You may have lost people during that transformation. You may have disappointed people who were comfortable with the old version of you. You may have been called distant, different, difficult, or arrogant simply because you stopped accepting what you once tolerated. But growth often looks strange to people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. Remember that. You don't have to hate anyone to outgrow them. You don't have to destroy anyone to move forward. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is quietly become unavailable for the patterns that once controlled you. Your past doesn't disqualify you from your future. It gives your future context. Every scar carries information. Every failure carries a lesson. Every painful chapter contains something that can be transformed into strength. So stop asking, why did this happen to me? Start asking, what did this teach me? That question changes everything. Because when you stop seeing yourself as the victim of your story and start seeing yourself as the student of your experiences, your perspective changes. You begin extracting wisdom from pain instead of allowing pain to control your identity. Maybe that sentence was circled because it revealed the moment you stopped being defined by what happened to you. And now you have a choice. You can keep staring at the sentence, remembering the pain, or you can keep writing, because that sentence may explain where you came from, but it does not decide where you're going. Sometimes you are too close to your own life to recognize the transformation happening inside you. You see every mistake because you remember making it. You remember every rejection because you remember exactly how it felt. You remember every door that closed because you stood there when it happened. You remember the nights when you questioned yourself, the moments when your confidence disappeared, and the seasons when you wondered whether you were actually moving forward at all. But when someone looks at your story from the outside, they may notice something you have completely overlooked. You kept going. That is the pattern. You may call it survival, but someone else might call it resilience. You may call it being alone, but someone else might see independence. You may call it failure, but someone else might see persistence. You may think you were simply trying to make it through another difficult day, while the people watching your journey were noticing that every difficult day was making you stronger. This is why perspective matters. When you live inside your own story, you naturally focus on the pain. You remember what went wrong. You remember what you lost. You remember the people who disappointed you. You remember the opportunities that never arrived. But if you stepped outside yourself for a moment and looked at your journey like a stranger, you might see something completely different. You might see someone who continued when quitting would have been easier. You might see someone who rebuilt after losing what they thought they couldn't live without. You might see someone who learned from mistakes instead of allowing those mistakes to become permanent definitions. You might see someone who became more disciplined after realizing that motivation alone wasn't enough. And that is the pattern your critics may never understand. Every challenge required you to adapt. Every disappointment forced you to rethink something. Every setback introduced you to a version of yourself that you hadn't met before. You didn't always recognize the growth while it was happening because growth rarely announces itself. Growth is usually quiet. It happens when you choose not to respond to the message that would pull you back into old drama. It happens when you walk away instead of begging someone to stay. It happens when you wake up and continue working even though nobody is applauding. It happens when you stop needing everyone to validate your decisions. One day, you look back and realize that the person who once needed constant approval is gone. The person who couldn't say no can now protect their time. The person who feared being alone can now enjoy their own company. The person who once collapsed after rejection can now use rejection as redirection. That doesn't mean you became perfect. It means you became aware. And awareness changes the entire trajectory of a life. So don't judge your progress only by what you have accomplished. Look at who you had to become to get this far. Maybe you aren't behind. Maybe you're in the middle of becoming someone you haven't fully recognized yet. The pattern has been there all along. You fall, you learn, you adapt, you rise, and then you become stronger than the version of yourself who faced the original challenge. That is what they saw when they studied your story. They weren't simply looking at what happened to you. They were looking at what you repeatedly did after it happened. And that may be the most important evidence in your entire story. Because circumstances can explain your past, but your response reveals your character. Nobody volunteers for the difficult seasons of life. You don't wake up one morning and ask for betrayal, rejection, disappointment, failure, loneliness, or uncertainty. You don't choose the moment when everything you trusted suddenly changes. You don't choose the phone call that breaks your heart, the opportunity that disappears, or the person you thought would stay who suddenly walks away. Yet somehow, when those moments arrive, they become classrooms you never asked to enter. And the strange thing about those classrooms is that they teach lessons comfort never could. When everything is going well, it is easy to believe you are strong. It is easy to believe you are disciplined when you have motivation. It is easy to believe you have confidence when everyone around you supports you. But difficulty introduces you to the real version of yourself. When nobody is watching, will you continue? When nothing is guaranteed, will you still believe in yourself? When the plan fails, will you create another plan? When people walk away, will you abandon yourself too? These are the questions difficult seasons force you to answer. Maybe the hardest chapter of your life didn't come to destroy you. Maybe it came to reveal what was already inside you, but had never been tested. The pressure revealed your patience. The rejection revealed your determination. The loneliness revealed your ability to stand independently. The failure revealed your willingness to learn. The uncertainty revealed whether you could keep moving without having every answer. You may have hated that chapter while you were living through it, but now you can recognize that it changed you. You became harder to manipulate because you learned to recognize patterns. You became more patient because you realized that not everything happens on your preferred timeline. You became more selective because you discovered that access to your life is valuable. You became stronger because you finally understood that strength isn't the absence of pain. Strength is continuing despite pain. That is the difference between being broken by an experience and being built through it. Your difficult season doesn't have to become your identity. It can become your training. Imagine an athlete preparing for the biggest competition of their life. They don't become stronger by avoiding resistance. They become stronger by meeting resistance repeatedly and refusing to quit. Every difficult repetition prepares them for a moment when their strength is required. Life can work the same way. Every challenge can become another repetition. Every setback can become another lesson. Every disappointment can become another opportunity to develop emotional discipline. But you have to stop asking why the road wasn't easier and start asking what the difficult road taught you. Maybe you learned that you can survive without certain people. Maybe you learned that your worth doesn't depend on someone's approval. Maybe you learned that failure isn't a permanent identity. Maybe you learned that you can begin again, even when beginning again feels humiliating. And perhaps the most powerful lesson was this: you are capable of more than you thought. You discovered that during the moment when you had almost nothing left, you still found a reason to take one more step. That step mattered, then another step, then another, until one day you looked back and realized you had traveled farther than you thought possible. So don't curse the chapter that trained you. Don't romanticize the pain, but don't waste it either. Take the lesson, take the strength, take the wisdom, leave the suffering behind. Your hardest chapter may have been painful, but it doesn't have to be meaningless. It can become the foundation for the person you are becoming. And when you finally understand that, you stop asking whether the struggle was worth it. You realize the struggle didn't create your worth, it revealed it. One of the most exhausting things you can do is spend your life trying to convince people that you have changed. You explain your decisions, you explain your boundaries, you explain why you walked away. You explain why you no longer respond the way you used to. You explain why you stopped chasing certain people, why you stopped accepting disrespect, and why you suddenly became comfortable with silence. But eventually you have to understand something: you are not required to make everyone understand your transformation. Some people only remember the version of you that they had access to. They remember when you were always available. They remember when you said yes even when you wanted to say no. They remember when you tolerated behavior that drained you. They remember when you needed their approval. They remember when you were afraid of losing them. So when you change, they may not recognize you. And instead of asking themselves what caused the change, they may accuse you of becoming arrogant, selfish, distant, or cold. Let them think what they want. You cannot build a powerful future while constantly returning to defend your past. There comes a moment when your behavior has to become the explanation. You don't need to announce that you are becoming disciplined. Wake up and do the work. You don't need to announce that you have boundaries. Enforce them. You don't need to announce that you are healing. Keep moving forward. You don't need to announce that you have changed. Let your consistency make the announcement for you. Because words can be debated, but patterns are difficult to argue with. When someone sees you consistently choosing peace instead of drama, they will eventually understand. When they see you consistently working toward your goals instead of seeking attention, they will eventually understand. When they see you no longer reacting to every insult, every rumor, or every provocation, they will eventually understand. And if they never understand, that's okay too. Your transformation does not require their permission. Think about how much energy you waste when you constantly try to correct people's opinions. Someone misunderstands you, and suddenly you feel obligated to explain. Someone criticizes your decision, and you feel pressured to defend it. Someone remembers an old version of you, and you start trying to prove that you are different. But what if you simply kept moving? What if you allowed people to believe whatever they wanted while you focused on becoming better? There is tremendous power in becoming unbothered by every misunderstanding. That doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop allowing every opinion to control your emotional state. Some people will only understand your value after they no longer have access to you. Some will only recognize your growth after they see the results. Some will never recognize it at all. None of that changes what you are becoming. Your job is not to force people to understand the new chapter. Your job is to write it. Keep building, Keep learning, keep improving, keep your promises to yourself. Let the old version of you remain in the past where it belongs. And remember this, you don't have to destroy anyone to prove that you have changed. You don't need revenge. You don't need dramatic announcements. You don't need to make people regret losing you. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply becoming so focused on your future that the opinions of your past no longer have the power to interrupt your progress. Let them talk. Let them remember. Let them misunderstand. You know the work you have done. You know the battles you fought. You know how far you've come. And eventually, the person you become will make the explanations unnecessary. Maybe those 3 experts circled the same sentence because it wasn't the ending. Maybe they saw something you haven't fully recognized yet. They saw a turning point. They saw a person who had already survived the chapter that was supposed to define them. And they understood that the story was still being written. Your story is not finished. Read that again. Your story is not finished. The rejection was not the ending. The betrayal was not the ending. The failure was not the ending. The season when nobody believed in you was not the ending. The moment you lost confidence was not the ending. Even the years you believe you wasted are not the ending. They are chapters. And chapters can change. You have probably spent too much time judging your entire life based on one difficult season. You experienced something painful, and your mind immediately tried to predict the rest of your future from that experience. One person betrayed you, so you assumed everyone would. One opportunity failed, so you assumed you would never succeed. One relationship ended, so you assumed you would always be alone. But one chapter cannot tell the entire story. You have pages ahead of you that haven't been written yet. There are opportunities you haven't discovered, people you haven't met, lessons you haven't learned, places you haven't seen, versions of yourself you haven't become. That means you cannot allow your past to make decisions for your future. You have to keep writing. And writing your next chapter requires action. You cannot build a different future with the exact same habits that created your current situation. You have to become intentional. You have to protect your attention. You have to become disciplined enough to continue when motivation disappears. You have to stop waiting for the perfect moment and start working with what you have. Some days you will feel powerful. Other days you will feel exhausted. Some days you will believe everything is possible. Other days you will question whether you are moving forward at all. Keep going anyway. Consistency is what turns a temporary decision into a permanent transformation. You don't need to know every step of the journey. You only need enough courage to take the next one. The future doesn't require you to have everything figured out. It requires you to refuse to quit on yourself. Think about how different your life could become if you stopped treating your past as a prison and started treating it as preparation. The pain taught you something. The failure taught you something. The disappointment taught you something. The loneliness taught you something. Now use those lessons. Don't carry the pain forever. Carry the wisdom. Don't carry the shame. Carry the experience. Don't carry the fear. Carry the courage you developed by facing it. Your scars don't need to disappear for you to move forward. They simply need to stop controlling where you go. One day you may look back at the exact moment you thought your life was falling apart and realize it was actually the moment your direction changed. Maybe that sentence they circled wasn't proof of your weakness. Maybe it was proof that you had already survived something extraordinary, and now you have the responsibility to finish the story. Not for the people who doubted you, not to make your enemies jealous, not to prove everyone wrong. Do it for yourself. Build the life you once thought was impossible. Become the person your younger self needed. Become so disciplined that temporary emotions no longer control permanent decisions. Become so focused that distractions lose their power. Become so grounded that other people's opinions no longer determine your worth. Because your story doesn't end where you were hurt. It continues where you choose to rise. The page is still blank. The next sentence is yours. Write something powerful.